So that's it. That's all you want me to do for $200, Steph said. His ears were cocked back, his muzzle curled up in a sarcastic smile. He raised a beer can to his lip and tilted it backwards till just a splash of beer touched his tongue. They stood on a freshly manicured lawn that ran all the way to a high privacy fence that rung the entire backyard of the frat house. It wasn't a loud party, at least not yet. Later on there is certain to be more than one keg stand and more than one game of beer pong, as one of the frat boys gave their sad impersonations of a DJ. But right then the party was pretty quiet, with groups of friends and acquaintances scattered all over the yard and the house huddled together talking. "That's it," Sarah replied. Her thin striped tail twitched a bit in annoyance. "One night in Mancroft Manor. You can't leave till sunrise." "That's right," Chuck chimed in. His eyes were bloodshot, his large frame thicker than normal, a natural habit of bulking up for the winter thanks to his ancestors. Dark brown fur stood in stark contrast with the white t-shirt and blue jeans. "Stay from sundown to sunup. Set up the camera so we can see you. That's it." "It's just some old building. What's the big deal? All I'll find is probably a rat or two. Give them some cheese and they leave me alone," Steph said with his ear cocked in a smile. His tail moved behind him in a confident wag. "Bro, you don't know about Mancroft?" Chuck's eyes went wide, his round ears folded back in shock. "So get this right. Mancroft was this old Servine. He went insane one night and killed and ate his wife and infant son right in the crib." "That's not true," Saren said, rolling her eyes, folding her ears back as she did so. Her thin orange and black tail twitched behind her even harder now. "He wasn't even 40. He did go insane, though. They say he didn't sleep for weeks, went to a bunch of doctors, and they kept telling him the same thing. Get some exercise, try meditation, relax, eat better, that sort of stuff. So one night, around midnight, he finally snapped. He went downstairs to the kitchen, creeping as quietly as he could, grabbed the meat cleaver, then snuck back upstairs ever so quietly so as not to wake his wife. He walked into her room with the meat cleaver and slit her throat in her sleep. Then he went into his infant son's room and did the same thing. Afterwards, he cut them both open and ate their hearts right out of their chest." "Ew," Steph said, a little grossed out. "Raw? Couldn't he have cooked it first or something?" Chuck giggled. Sarah's tail stopped in dead twitch. She cocked an ear back and raised her eyebrow as if to say, "Really?" "Well, I'm just saying," Steph replied. He looked down and folded his ears back in embarrassment. "Sorry," he muttered. "Anyway," Saren continued, glaring at Steph, "he went upstairs, still holding the knife, laid in bed and thought to himself, 'Now I can finally rest.' But he didn't. He kept staring at the ceiling until dawn. When the first rays of light hit the window, they said he couldn't take it anymore, and—" She drew a clawed digit across her own throat. "They say he's still up there, wandering the halls. Anyone who tries sleeping in the manor is going to get their throat slit in their sleep, and Mancroft will eat their heart." "Who are they, anyway?" Steph gave air quotes around the word they as he spoke, his tail tip twitching in annoyance. "They always talk about these things. Well, who are they? How do they know?" "I don't know. It's just they. That's how you know it's a legend. Besides," Saren said, "you need to quit stalling. Either you're in or you're scared. A fraidy little pup peeing in his diaper." Chuck laughed. "First, I'm not scared. I already said I would do it. Second, what are you, in the 3rd grade? Fraidy pup? Really?" Steph said, cocking an eyebrow of his own. "What are you going to do next? Give me a purple nurple?" Chuck gave him a dark look in response. Saren smiled at Steph, her tail still twitching. "Tomorrow, then," she said. "Yeah, we'll see you down there, bro," Chuck said, a smile on his muzzle and ears. What, you gonna join me? Steph replied, looking over at Chuck. No. Chuck looked down in embarrassment. I meant on the laptop, 'cause the camera thing. Saren held her own hand paw out, palm up. Chuck placed his on top of hers, palm up as well. Steph looked at it for a moment, then sighed and placed his on top of theirs, palm down. They pumped their hand paws up and down twice before letting them go. It's a bet, Chuck said, smiling. Mancroft Manor looked even creepier in the late evening if it was possible. Most old buildings didn't look creepy to Steph. They just looked rotten. Empty places that had for one reason or another outlived their usefulness to the ones that had at last and simply didn't or couldn't find another owner. Mancroft Manor was different. It sat in a field on a hill covered in tall weeds. The massive house looked as if it was a bad photocopy of a Victorian house that simply didn't look quite right. There was a widow's walk that Steph was certain led to nowhere and had no way to even access it. The doors themselves were oversized and almost massive, with fake wooden Roman columns next to them and peeling paint. Each door had a fake archway above it, with wood that had been bent and carved with the imagery of vines and words written in Latin. Steph wouldn't have been surprised if they spelled out, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter." An old porch wrapped around the front of the building, with the roof near the end collapsed long ago. Okay, Steph muttered to himself. All I have to do is stay the night in this place, and I'll win the bet. Too dang easy. At least that's what he told himself as he pushed open the ancient door. It creaked open and stuck halfway. Inside was about what you would expect. The interior was just some old house. There were holes in the wall from someone stealing the copper wiring. Other than a few cobwebs in the corners and a lot of dust, there wasn't anything in the place. This is the easiest $200 I've ever made, Steph said with a tail wag. The last few rays of light shone in through the broken windows as he unrolled his sleeping bag. His backpack was set down beside it. From inside he pulled out a camera and set it up. "Can you see me?" he asked. His phone chimed in. It was a text from Saren saying yes. Saren sat in her apartment on her couch. Her laptop was open before her on a small coffee table. A green and black image of Steph kneeling before the camera filled in the screen. The camera was already in night mode. That meant there would be barely any light left in the old place. Perfect. Saren and Chuck crowded next to each other, giggling a bit. "So you got everything ready?" she asked him. "You bet. This is going to be great." He tilted an ear and a grin back at the tiger next to him. "So what's first?" "Let's try some creepy stare sounds," Saren replied, as she opened an app on her computer and clicked a button. Inside the ancient house, loud, echoing thumps rang out, followed by an echo of stairs loudly creaking under a heavy weight. They giggled as they watched Steph pop his head up on screen. "What the hell?" he shouted. "Oh," he replied, looking down at the camera. "You. Very funny. I'll be right back." He stood up for a moment, then walked off camera. "What's he doing?" Chuck muttered. Saren shushed him, her tail tip beginning to twitch as she leaned forward towards the laptop. Steph walked back in with a wireless speaker. "Funny," he said, his ears tilted backwards in annoyance. "Not the only ones, though, are they? I'll be right back." He left the screen again for a few minutes, then returned. "Another speaker. Oh, a projector. That would have been funny. Did I get it all?" Saren and Chuck glowered at the screen. She wrapped her tail around herself as she leaned forward, holding her knees. Chuck slashed at the air with his claws, growling loudly. "I can't believe we're going to have to give that jerk $200, Saren muttered. "Like hell," Chuck replied. "I have a couple of friends on the football team who owe me a favor. We can—" She shushed him, looking at the laptop. "Did you see that?" she asked, looking up at Chuck. "What?" he asked, leaning towards the screen. Nothing happened. The gray wolf on screen had settled back into his sleeping bag. That was all. I thought I saw, she muttered. Then it flashed across the screen again. An antler moved in the distance. Then a pair of glowing eyes. A creature crouched down, then disappeared. They both looked at each other, ears folded back, faces washed in shock as they looked at the screen. Sarah grabbed her phone and started typing. Get out, get out, get out, get out, she texted. The wolf looked back into the camera, then cocked an ear grin. Hell no, he replied. Easy money. A loud thump rang out from the laptop. The gray wolf looked up. What else is in here? He asked, clearly annoyed. Nothing, bro! Get out! Chuck shouted feebly at the laptop. Saren texted, Not us! Get out, please! Steph looked down at his phone, then back into the camera. Not you? Then who? A ghostly image of a deer stood above them, blade held high above his head. His eyes glowed bright in the pale green light of the night vision of the camera. The blade came down. Steph threw his arm back in defense, knocking the camera backwards. His blood-curdling screams rang out from the laptop. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, Saren muttered, her lips curled up on her muzzle in fear. Her tail thwacked against the couch loudly. I'm calling the cops, Chuck said, pulling his cell phone out. We killed him, Saren said, clutching her hand paws to her chest. Her eyes glistened with tears. Chuck spoke on the phone as Saren sat on the couch, holding her knees, rocking back and forth with her tail twitching. They're sending a cop to us, Chuck replied, stuffing his phone in his pocket. A few minutes later, a police officer arrived at their door. A large minotaur with his horns filed down in that strange fad that most minotaurs had at the time. His sharp blue suit was pressed and starched to a near-stiff cardboard perfection. As he entered the doorway, he ducked down, smiling apologetically. I'm sorry, but we'll need to take a statement, he said. Saren sat on the couch, curled up on herself. Is he? She asked. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we just don't have that information yet. Try not to give up hope, he replied. What the hell? Don't give up hope? Chuck shouted. Is Steph dead or what? The bull looked up at the bear. We've got a team investigating that right now. What would really help us, though, is if you could answer a few questions. We just watched our friend die, Saren muttered. I'm sorry that you had to witness all of that, the bull replied, looking down into his blue hat. Really, I am. But right now, we have an ambulance down there. If anyone can help your friend Steph, it's them. He's going to see the best doctors in the county. If there's any chance to save him, we're taking it. You can't help them, but you can still help your friend. They both nodded. He started asking questions. Then more questions. His questions ran through most of the night and on into the early hours of the morning. Chuck and Saren felt wrung out by the time the large bull stood up. I think that about does it, he said with a polite smile. Can we see him? Chuck said. Is that something you want? The cop asked. Saren looked at Chuck. They both looked at the cop and nodded. All right, he replied. Follow me. They rode in the back of the cop car in silence through the small city. Traffic was light, though if that was a blessing or a curse, neither Saren nor Chuck could tell. As they entered the old section of the city, houses began to thin out. Trees grew larger, shading parts of the street. The street itself was speckled brown and gold with the last few remaining dead and dying leaves of fall. The trees finally parted, and Mancroft Manor rose in the distance, a black crumbling keep upon its hill of weeds. An ambulance sat parked in front with its back door open. Its lights weren't even flashing. A black van sat next to it with the word coroner printed on the side. Saren put her hand paw to her muzzle, her ears plastered against her skull, her eyes wet with emotion. The bull parked the car, then reached for the receiver on his radio and pressed the button on the side once. We're here, he said, and walked around the car and opened the rear door to let Saren and Chuck out. They both walked slowly through the tall weeds, dragging their feet as they walked up to the ambulance. Out of the large front door of the manor, a gurney started to be wheeled out. A body laid on top of it, covered with a bloody sheet. Oh my God, Sarah said, turning towards Chuck. The bull walked forward, holding his hat. I really hate to do this, he said, looking down. "But we need you to identify the body since you're here." "Oh, God," Chuck muttered. "We really need you to do this," the bull said gently. "I know it's going to take a lot of strength, but—" No, Sarah replied. "We'll go." Slowly, they shuffled forward towards the gurney. She and Chuck stood side by side as the EMS personnel stopped, their muzzles pointed down, one a black mask of a face whose ears shook violently as he looked down and away, almost as if he was ashamed. The other was a deer with short antlers. "On 3, the deer said. 1, 2, 3! The body on the sheet shouted, sitting upright. It held its arms out like a zombie. Saren screamed, jumping backwards. Chuck yelled, stepping back as well, both raising their claws in a fighting stance. Seth's laughter echoed down the hill as he pulled the sheet off himself. "A joke?" Saren said. Steph nodded. "A joke?" she said again. Steph continued laughing as he climbed off the gurney. Chuck didn't say anything. He looked down for a moment, his ears tilted into a smile. Then he began to laugh too. Finally, Saren joined in, her anger turning to humor. A couple of hours later, the ambulance and the coroner's van had both left. The cop stuck around, however, sitting on the porch between Saren and Chuck. "So, how did you?" she asked. Steph smiled. "Those 2 EMS are Josh and Kareth. I did 2 tours with them overseas. This big guy I met through them. He's Carter." The bull smiled and waved. "I'm stunned," Sarah said. "That was one hell of a prank. I'd have to say, though, you did almost as good. I don't know how you set up that rusty kitchen knife to fall from the ceiling like that. Damn thing about gave me a heart attack when it landed next to my head," Steph said, smiling. Chuck and Saren looked at each other, then back at Steph. Their humor was gone. Their ears had folded back slightly in panic. The lips on their muzzles curled up in shock. "We didn't do that, bro," Chuck said. "Oh, come on," Steph replied. "Of course you did." "No, we didn't," Sarah said again. "We set up the sound effects and the projector and stuff, but a knife?" "Yeah," Chuck replied, looking back at the door of the house. "That could kill you, bro. We wouldn't go that far." The front door of the mansion was hung open. A shaft of light pierced through the darkness of the portal, revealing only dusty floorboards. Just beyond that light, 2 eyes glowed for a moment, back at Chuck, then disappeared. Hey everyone, I'm Lou. Thanks for hanging out, and I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please click the red subscribe button and ring the bell next to it. That way you can be notified every time I post a story, which is twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. And if enough of you do it, I can be paid for these stories that I post. So it's a win-win. You get good stories. I eventually, maybe sometime, hopefully, God willing, get money. Thanks for hanging out again, and please like, share, and subscribe, and send this to your friends. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.